Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Spotlight with Sandalina, and I'm your talk show host, Sandalina Sitar. Today's guest is Sabeen, who is a South Asian Muslim TikTok content creator, podcast host, and ex-investment banking analyst. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
I'm so excited to be here.
So I actually saw Sabeen on my For You page on TikTok. I had a friend send me her TikTok and tell me that I should reach out to her because we're both Pakistani, we're both Muslim, and at the time we were both in our investment banking jobs. So I'd commented on her TikTok and DM'd her very aggressively, telling her that I wanted to be her friend. And lo and behold, we actually did end up hanging out a few months later. We grabbed coffee. I think we went to Bryant Park and sat inside of a Whole Foods.
We sat inside of a Whole Foods for like 3 hours
Yeah.
and just like unpacked all of our childhood Pakistani like Muslim trauma and like all of the banking trauma. And I was like, okay, this was like very much needed today.
Exactly. So that's basically what happened. And then the rest is history. We stayed in touch and we've been supportive of each other through our creative ventures. And we also both at separate times ended up leaving our investment banking jobs, which we will get into during this episode. Let's start at the very beginning. Tell me a little bit about where you grew up and your upbringing.
Grew up in Westchester, New York. So I actually was born in like White Plains, and we ended up moving to Pakistan actually for 3 years after kindergarten, which like a lot of people just don't know. We were there. It was just like a really instrumental piece of my growing up. That's like where I learned how to speak Urdu and write Urdu. I also just feel like I was exposed to so much of what it's like to live in a third world country as a first world person.
Yeah.
And the access that we had to money and like servants, like saying servants like sounds wrong, but like drivers and maids and like I think coming from the States and not being used to growing up with that, it provided a really cool opportunity to understand like the economic dynamics and understand like why our maids were like not going to school and how we could help them go to school. So I think my family did a lot in the time that we were there for like people in our own households. Like if they wanted to like go to school, we would like pay for them to go to school, or their kids, or some of them wanted to get married and like leave their family homes. Like we would like help them with that. And I think, I don't know, like I had my tutor, and then after I was done, like my like maid would also like have like should be taught how to read and like work with the same tutor. So I think it was just like a really cool way to connect with my community and understand from a very young age like the resources and opportunities I have, not everyone else does, and that like my family was doing their part to give back to that in that way. Connected a lot with, my extended family. I struggled a lot really early on at school. I went to LGS, if anyone's like a grammar school kid here, and was like bullied the first like 3 months. And I was so anxious. And I used to like literally like my mom had to sit outside the classroom because I would cry and cry and cry. And then I don't know, somehow just kind of got over it. So I was just like super athletic, and then I realized I was hot shit and made a lot of friends and like ended up being really cool because I kind of leaned into my whole like, I'm foreign and I'm taking an easy Urdu class. I'm not supposed to be here, but I'm here. But yeah, just did that. That was like a really transformative 3 years. Came back because unfortunately it just got unsafe. It was at the time where there's a lot of suicide bombings going on.
Where in Pakistan was this?
Lahore.
Okay.
And then my brother went to Lahore American School, and so then it was like him being at LAS, like, is that kind of a target? Like, there were some bombs going off near there. So my family was like,
oh my God,
time to skirt. So we came back, moved to a wealthier town in Westchester called Scarsdale, which if you work in finance, your bosses are all probably from there and take the train every morning. Kind of instilled in me this ability or desire to like want to be super, super wealthy and well-to-do.
Yeah, that's fair.
My peers were people whose parents had like $8 million Hamptons houses that they would use for like a couple of months during the summer. And I would say my circle of friends, like I feel like I kind of befriended the people that like didn't fit in with the stereotype, like the other brown kids, like the not super popular kids. Like, I don't know, I think those just became my friends. And looking back, I was never going to fit in because I, wasn't like everyone else. But I still like enjoyed being a powerhouse. Like I still leaned into things that I was good at. And so I like did every activity under the sun. Like I grew up being a very multifaceted person. And that was something that was super encouraged both by my parents and at school. Just to be able to compete. It was like a super competitive public school. Like I think our entire class went to like top 40 schools. It's, everyone's like nice and there's like a social aspect to it, but it's also like very competitive. And if I didn't compete, like I wouldn't end up at like I was competing with my peers to get into Michigan or Cornell or wherever else people were going. Yeah, Harvard took like 8 kids from my class the year I graduated.
Wow.
So it's like one of those.
Which I think is interesting because coming from the West Coast, so I grew up in Cupertino, California, which is also very competitive, but it sounds like a little bit of a different demographic. So where I come from, it's a lot of children of South Asian and East Asian immigrants. Yeah. And it is very competitive. But what I think coming to the East Coast, I realize is there are a lot of these schools in very affluent areas that are almost feeders for Ivy Leagues. And you don't see that on the West Coast. You think everything's fair, but you realize there's a lot of privilege and a lot of legacy. I mean, I was competing with legacy. Like, it's a super white, wealthy Jewish town, and I say that as like I'm not competing as if I'm some like, you know, low like minority, like doesn't have a lot of resources. Like my parents are both doctors. Like, you're just kind of like competing on a completely different playing field. But again, like grew up very privileged. Like, my parents are both doctors, like instilled a sense of like having a profession, like needing to make like have financial success. Like, I think I just grew up around it being reinforced. That grew up in Scarsdale, but also was very fortunate, grew up with like a very close-knit circle of like Pakistani girls. My mom and dad did such a good job cultivating a Pakistani community within Westchester that was so welcoming and super, super close. Like, I didn't grow up with sisters. Like, pretty much feel like these guys became my sisters. Their parents are like other parents to me. That's so lovely.
Like, I go have chai with them. Like, it's just like such a tight-knit community. Different layers of conservatism and Islam. I think my mom was definitely more lenient. I think I was like allowed to wear like things that worked like to my knee length. I was allowed to wear sleeveless. Like, other girls weren't.
So you don't hear that very often in the Muslim community, in the Pakistani community. So what made your mom that way? Was
she maybe was raised like more progressively? I know that my aunts are very progressive. I first fracture of my mom and I's relationship, although like we're fine. But I kind of just never agreed that like what I was wearing made me like more or less of a person or of like a Muslim specifically. And that started in like 7th grade. And I got to a point where I would just start changing on the bus and I would change in the bathroom and I was like
we all have those stories.
But yeah,
it's
like
funny.
Grew up not being allowed to date, being told like dating was a huge no.
And then all of a sudden
you're like 24, they're like,
so why aren't you married?
No, my mom literally just sat down with me and had that conversation. She was like, I think it's time to maybe start looking, you know, to find someone. I'm like, yeah, let me just pull them out of like a hat just real like quick. Let me just
snap your fingers. They'll come up out of thin air. Yeah, that's how that works. Yeah, so it's hard. It's a process.
Yeah.
I want to backtrack a little bit. Let's go to high school.
Yes.
So what kind of a person were you in high school? Like, were you like the very outgoing person? Were you the very shy person? Like, if you had to assign an archetype to yourself, what would it be?
Oh God. It's so funny you asked that because I've thought so much about running, and I have run into high school people in New York, and I'm so different from the way that I was. I think I was outgoing, but I was not. I was confident in my like academic abilities. I was confident in my extracurriculars. I think I was like confident in the classroom per se, but I was not confident in like the way that I looked or my culture or my body. Yeah. And I think like that kind of brought some insecurity. I think I like looking back, it seems so dumb because I was like, oh, I totally should have just like had a conversation or like talked to those like quote unquote people that I thought were cooler than me. I just like never did. And I kind of stayed in my lane with my friends.
But you feel like socially maybe you boxed yourself in a little out of fear for, I mean, social dynamics in high school are tough. It's not easy.
I think the social dynamics just, I was like, in my head, I was like, oh, like, I just don't, like looking back, it's not also in my head. Like, looking back, I don't think in the circle of, like, popular people, there were really any brown kids or any people of color. Yeah. So I think, like, at the time when I was in high school, was struggling so much with, like, okay, like, my relationship with my body is reflected through my relationship and what I can wear, and my mom won't let me wear certain things, and so I just don't feel comfortable in myself. So how am I supposed to feel comfortable, like, being confident around people that I'm not sure will accept me anyways?
Yeah. That's
and I think that was, like, my whole thing in high school was, like, coming to terms with what I am or am not allowed to do, and the type of person I am or am not allowed to be, like, as deemed by my parents.
What was your relationship like with the Muslim community growing up, the positives and the negatives? Because I feel like in my case, I feel like high school and college was kind of when I was experiencing like the auntie culture a little bit more.
Okay.
So what's your experience with that been?
Yeah, I think high school, it was overwhelmingly positive when I was still like at home in high school, middle school. Again, we had like, I think there's like an outer circle of aunties that like we're not super close with that are like still in the community, but there's a very much an inner close circle of like, these are my best friend's parents. Like I would call them like mom and dad if I could. Like, so I think that was overwhelmingly positive. Like I would see them every single weekend. Like I had my own relationships with them. Like I like, you know, literally would do anything. Like it continued throughout college. It changes later, which we can get into a bit, but like super, super positive. I would say like that was always my relationship with that community. I think in college, I didn't build a Muslim community at school. There's a lot of Muslims in Michigan. PSA, MSA, like just didn't work for me. Pakistani communities at Michigan, they were all friends from like their family friend circle in Michigan. So I was like, I don't really like know how to get in here.
It can be a bit difficult, yeah.
And I think also college for me was the first time where I was like, I can literally, excuse my French, do whatever the fuck I want and no one can tell me what to do. And so I can like drink, I can wear whatever I want to wear. Like I can talk to whoever I want to talk to. And so like, and no one's watching me, no one's saying anything, and no one's involved in that. And like, that's just something coming out of high school, like I had a boyfriend in high school who my parents were not aware of. So I dated him for 2.5 years, like part of my senior year and into college. And my parents had no idea. And so being in college where I was like, I can call my boyfriend whenever I want and I can like go out wherever I want and I can do whatever the hell I want. Like I did not want to bring any judgment into that.
Yeah.
Not that I'm saying I would be judged by MSA or PSA. Like we go to Michigan, like of course they know what goes on. Yeah. But I just was like, I'm having a great time and I feel very balanced because I have my like friends from home and like they're still super involved in my life too.
So I get that. I think for me, I actually didn't involve myself with MSA or PSA at all in college. I think senior year at Berkeley, I like went to a couple PSA events with some friends because it was more like cultural. But I think one thing that I always felt was people always mean well, but I think in a context where you're all there, where your commonality is religion, especially in the Muslim community, it feels like there's a lot of judgment that gets cast, and there's a lot of holier than thou attitude, and it's very prevalent in the parents, in the kids. It comes into the MSA clubs too, obviously varying campus to campus. But who knows? I could also just be projecting, right? Because those are times in my life where I was like, oh, like I'm not religious enough, or I'm not cultured enough. Like I'm going to stick out. So it could also be a self-fulfilling prophecy.
For sure. I mean, I feel like religion was told to me through my mom, and it was very like authoritative over how I practice my religion, which is fair because she's a parent, so I understand. But to me, it just made me feel like I wasn't practicing religion for myself. I was doing it for someone else. By the time I went to college, I was like, religion is something that's super private. And there were years where I was doing namaz and stuff on my own. There were years where I like didn't do it at all, like when things got kind of like difficult. And like even to this day, like it's something I just kind of keep to myself and like want to explore on my own. And it's not really something that I bring into relationships or conversations right now, just because I like need to understand what it means to me, and that might change. So I think, you know, that I didn't really want to go be a part of a religious community because I was like, I don't really know how I feel about this, and I don't want to like change my mind and like, you know, act a certain way and like lose something, you know?
Absolutely. And I agree. I think religion is a very private matter, and it's frustrating that oftentimes the community tries to put it up for display for this is what you should do and shouldn't do, and this is right and wrong. And it's really not anybody's place. It's your own journey, and spiritual journeys ebb and flow. It's not a linear, like you're dedicated your whole life, you're there's waves.
And I think thing is, I understand it though, because it can be a really great community building opportunity. I mean, like you literally, like I think you just went to like an NYU like Islamic like a Jummah prayer.
I just went to Jummah prayer.
It feels nice when you can like be a part of that community, but it's like, I think just right now and at the time, like I was just like, I can't do this. So I was like, I want to go do fun stuff.
And for me, and I think for me too, New York City was the first time I was in a Muslim community where I didn't feel super otherized or sticking out like a sore thumb. I do think New York, relative to like New York City, specifically Manhattan specifically, is much more liberal and open-minded versus the other communities I've experienced in various places across the country. But I also understand what you're saying, that it's just, it's a very personal, private thing, and it's hard to kind of affiliate yourself with something when you yourself don't know how, what your relationship with that thing is at the moment.
Yeah, I would say I grew up very cultural. Yes. And I think I am a very cultural person. I don't think I'm very religious. it gets frustrating because those two things often get intertwined.
Yeah.
But
go hand in hand.
And I also think it's frustrating because you can't necessarily like exude culture sometimes. It is just like, I speak the language, I love the music, like that's being cultural. Yeah. But I feel like sometimes I'm not like performatively cultural. So my mom is like, oh, she goes to like all these desi restaurants and like you don't go. And I'm like, okay. Like, cool. Like, thank you. So I don't know. Like I feel like I'm very cultural. I love my culture. I love being Pakistani and like have had a whole like transformation in that department. But I'm not very religious, and maybe that'll change. I don't know.
And I think that's fine. And I think it's a beautiful thing that you're in tune with yourself and know what it is that resonates with you at this point in your life and doesn't. And I think that's part of the journey. I think it's very relatable. I think a lot of people feel this pressure to be one way or the other, but life is full of the gray area. And I think that's a key takeaway from
made me who I am. Ended up getting into Michigan, got into Ross, which is business school at Michigan, which was great.
Yeah, how was that experience? It's a great school, by the way.
I freaking love the University of Michigan. We also just won a national championship, and you can't see these because it's off screen, but my socks are Michigan socks today, and I wore those intentionally.
I see them. I can attest. Yeah, those are cute.
But I'm a huge Michigan fan. It was like the best decision. I almost didn't get into Michigan, but got off the wait list, whatever, got in.
Okay. No, that's still getting in.
Yeah, got in and just was like a really transformative couple of years. I met some of my best friends. I think it was really good to go to school in the Midwest and get away from the East Coast for a while and just try something different. I don't think I would ever live there long term because I just don't think it's for me. But loved the little like town of Ann Arbor, loved our school, fell in love with college football, and just like I'm such a super like very proud Michigan person.
Tell me a little bit more about your career trajectory.
From a very young age, it was like you have to pick a career, like that's just being very clear. I think I like went into school, I was like, okay, I'm gonna be a doctor. I did science research, although I was really bad at AP Bio now that I like look back on it. Got to orientation, like saw the list of classes I would have to take for pre-med, and I was like, there's no way I'm doing this. And so got really lucky because my high school does like an externship program, and I did my externship. Yeah, there was a content creator named Lucy Fink, and she was like blowing up at the time. She did her externship in my 5th grade class when I was 10 years old, and I reached out to her and I was like, I don't know if you remember me, but like I'm a senior now and I would love to do my externship with you. She was at Refinery 29, which is a media company.
Nice.
And so I did my externship there, and I was like, whoa, like there's a whole world of like media and marketing and business and content creation. And I was like, oh, there's no way I'm ever going to like do anything with this. And then I was like, oh, I wonder what business is. And so spent my freshman year just like kind of beefing up a potential career in marketing, like took a bunch of marketing club roles, leveraged the fact that I'd interned at Refinery 29 in content. And I was like pretty certain I was going to do marketing. Got into Ross my sophomore year. I transferred in because I was like in arts and sciences first.
Okay.
And they like, I feel like that's a really proud achievement of mine because they only took 100 kids as transfers, and they took the remaining rest of the class straight from high school. So I was like, came in and I was like, okay, like I could do this. And I just think I fell into investment banking. Ross is super investment banking heavy.
Yeah.
And
I believe it.
It just seemed so badass at the time. I was like, I'm going to be this investment banker. Like, this is what finance is. Like, I can totally do this. My best friend was also recruiting banking. And I like, it just seemed to like everyone was doing it. Everyone was like, you might as well do it because it started so early. For context, investment banking recruiting starts like sophomore year.
Yeah.
And it started like November of my sophomore year. And so
kind of so ridiculously early, but anyways.
Well, which is exactly what happened to me because the main reason I think I went into it was I was like, people were like, you should just start recruiting because if you decide later you want to do it, like you're kind of like pooched, like you're not going to be able to get back into this.
Yeah.
So I ended up going through the recruiting process. I think at the time also was working on a startup, which was like a smoothie and acai bowl startup that we built an app for.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And we like launched it in the business school, and I was like, this is so freaking cool. Like I got to build a business. I got to work with all these really smart people who were skilled at other parts of that business. I got to have like a physical storefront in a school and tell my friends, I was like, hey, this is my business. Like, can you support me? Like it just was really cool. And it was the most hands-on transformative learning experience I've ever had. And I learned everything. Like my finance basics, like my marketing basics, everything that I learned like came from running a business more so than it did from taking classes.
Okay.
And just loved like that kind of understanding the industry and understanding the competitors and like how we were going to win. And so I kind of leveraged that in my conversations in investment banking, networking, and interviews because it was so different and people always asked about it. And it allowed me to very authentically be like, oh, I want to do investment banking because I want to be able to like help a business like win and evaluate its strategic choices by like understanding the entire market space and things that I thought investment banking was.
Right. Little do you know, it's just logos all day.
Yeah.
But anyways.
So yeah, like had a really grueling recruiting process. I didn't have a very financy resume because all of my past stuff was this startup and then like marketing stuff. Didn't have super high grades, so like didn't get into the diversity programs either. Recruited on the normal timeline against a bunch of white men. And beat them out. And,
good.
Ended up at a bulge bracket bank.
Yes.
Which is like one of the bigger banks. And
big name.
Yeah, got into my group of choice, which was tech, media, and telecom, because I was like, I would love to do media work.
Also one of the more competitive groups for the audience, just so you know. Like,
so I like
not easy.
Was like, I have this media experience, like I like have some tech experience, like I be a great way to explore both of those and what I want to do. Loved the people I was working with at the time, like loved my like the main point of contact during my internship. My internship was so fun because it was during COVID. And it was completely online.
Yeah.
And we were not allowed to work weekends. And
wait, what?
Yeah, we were not allowed to work weekends.
Interns weren't allowed to work weekends?
Interns were
Is that still the case?
No. That was because it was COVID and they didn't want people it was literally June 2020. Okay, so they did not want, it was like very new. They didn't want people to be burnt out.
Nice.
It was amazing because I was like super depressed when COVID hit, like living with my parents, and then me and my roommates from college all collectively decided to move back to Ann Arbor and intern virtually.
Okay.
So I was like living with my best friends. I was working like 9 to 5 investment banking hours, which I wasn't even working with clients. I was like working on my own project.
That's a dream.
Yeah. Literally was working on a project where I was like, this company's gonna merge with this company. And I was like, I'm so cool. I'm my own managing director. I learned probably nothing, but I learned how to put together a kick-ass PowerPoint. And
that's the first step.
Yeah, and I would just work 9 to 5. I had weekends off. Like
my internship summer was not like that. Well, because I'm a year below, so I was in summer 2021 when I was an investment banking
by that
intern.
Point. Yeah.
Yes, I was in person, so a little bit of a different story on the hours front at least.
Yeah,
it's interesting because when we're in college, and this is a question that I ask myself now that I've left investment banking. I always ask myself why I did it in the first place. And it's interesting because I think there's a few components to it too. I think first of all, there's like a genuine interest in something that's analytical. Okay, like that has to be the first step. The second thing is a desire for something that pushes you to your limits. They always say that one investment banking year is like a dog year. You're learning so much more. It's so much more jam-packed by, it's a function of the hours, but also the level of work and client exposure that you have in the job, which is very interesting. But there are lots of jobs that do that. One other component is the pay. The pay is very good, allegedly. I've been talking to my friends in tech, and I'm like, wait a second.
Yeah.
I'm like, hold on. I was like, somebody lied to me about Wall Street.
Made this up.
The thing about Wall Street is I think the upside is the potential upside in the long run is what the thing is, because in tech you can make a lot of money, but banker money goes crazy. Goes crazy. If you do the math, I think that if you start investment banking at the age of 21, 22, and you work full-time till you're 30, in theory, if you're not a reckless spender, you should be able to have $1 million saved up if you invest it properly and you put all your bonuses away. It's definitely possible.
I think investment banking has a couple of different attractions. I think in school it started as like, I'm going to be so badass. And like, it was great. Like the 2 years, it was I feel like as a woman of color, I felt like I had something to prove. Yeah. And I was like, oh, I can take this job. Yeah. And I think the literal like last 2 years of college, I felt like such a powerhouse. I was like, I have this top tier job. Like I have the job at the firm that everyone else wants.
People doubt you. Yeah.
And so I think for me, it was like, okay, well, I just came in like as a transfer. I beat the transfer pool. Like I made that number. And then I also just like beat all of you in recruiting. Yeah. And that felt good.
And when you grow up in a competitive high school environment, by the way, it kind of it breeds that in you, that you want that satisfaction, that validation, that you were able to do something that your peers couldn't, and it makes you feel better.
Oh, yeah. I went on LinkedIn and I like looked at where other peers were working. A bunch of them went to Goldman because of someone's uncle, but look again,
because of someone's uncle, very important distinction.
There were like it felt nice. I think also like the Pakistani community reinforces it too, because they're like, oh, Sabeen's working at, you know, blah blah, and like Sabeen got this great job, and like that's so cool. And so
it's a soundbite. People love the soundbite at Davits,
and it was a great feeling. I think there was a genuine interest. I think like when I was telling you, I just think what I thought I was going to be doing and what I did during my internship is not what you do as an analyst. And I also think that I feel like coming off of a senior year where I literally did not have to go to classes in person, I did not have to do anything. I spent my whole senior year just like building my own startup. Like I really just think a lot of the like corporate life was not as routine and normal to me anymore. And so going into corporate life and having to adjust to, you know, kind of this mentality of like doing it for the company and like, you know, everything you do is for someone else. Everything you do is for like someone else's team, and like not having control over anything in your life really was a really hard adjustment.
You're at your boss's mercy. You're at 24 hours a day in banking, at least weekends, you name it.
Yeah. And so I think it was just a disconnect between, I think what I thought I was going to be doing. I think how the industry definitely changed a lot, like how I probably changed, like, you know, through my, like, I would say the 3 years of senior year to like when I signed the offer to the 2 years that I did work. So I think there were pulls to it. Like I was making a good amount of money, but you might be making a lot more money sooner than your peers if you stay past like 2 or 3 years. That's fair.
That's fair. Yeah.
But like the amount of sacrifice it would take to get to that point just seemed so not worth it to me. And I also just was like, I don't know, like I feel like my friends that are software engineers make a great amount, but also like get off their work and then have time to do side hustles and other things that they make money off that they're like interested in. And so
outside of work,
it just like, you know, it's just like it had pulls to it. But I think like at the end of the day, like there are people that work well with it and they can kick ass and make it work, and that's great. I just was not one of those people.
I agree. And I think you touched on a very important point going back to the beginning of it all is, as a woman of color, the chip on your shoulder that you're talking about, I think that's huge. I mean, I'm sure that you relate to this too, but there are so many times that I can point to in my life where as a South Asian woman, I could see other people looking at me and be like, oh, she must not be that smart. She must not be as smart as she thinks she is. Why is she in this class? I can show
you the TikTok comments on your TikToks and mine that say exactly that.
There are so many comments on both of our TikToks. I'm sure you get this too. I get the one that's like, oh, you were just a diversity hire, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And I'm just like, are you serious? But the point is, when you get that investment banking job, it is a badge of honor. Even no matter how humble and down to earth you are, it does not matter. It is still something that makes you feel proud of yourself. And you should be, because it's a very difficult thing to get and everybody wants it. And once you have it, it's like, I feel like, at least in my case, I feel like my expectations got a little bit higher in terms of what I was going to get out of it. And I think when I started the job, in terms of my learning experience and my productivity and also leadership and management style. And I think a lot of those things just ended up not panning out the way that I'd hoped. And I felt like I was in situations where my growth was just stunted as a professional. And I hated that. And it wasn't just that. That's just, you know, the problematic front. Outside of it, it's the health. It's the work-life balance. It's also feeling like, by the way, like I felt like socially I wasn't a fit. I feel like I wasn't a fit for what the typical investment banking analyst looks like and talks like, and that's fine. That's not the reason I left, but it certainly didn't make me want to stay when I was at the breaking point anyways.
I feel like sometimes socially, like I don't 100% fit in here. There's not a lot of diversity. I like will grind and I'll do what I'll have to do, but I don't know if I'm doing well. Like I just kind of constantly felt behind from a work perspective. I constantly felt like I didn't really quite fit in. I would say like the second year I was there, I feel like year one was great, but I feel like the content creation piece, which we can talk about, when that started happening, that kind of messed up the way that people perceive me at work and the way that I perceive myself.
Right.
It wasn't what I wanted. I feel like people weren't really like willing to invest in me. I also didn't really understand how to navigate corporate. Like that's a huge thing. Like I didn't grow up like with parents that worked in corporate. Like I came in very naive. I came in like very just like, yes, I'll do whatever you want and work hard. But there's like a lot of kind of strategy and politics in corporate life that I was not aware of.
Yeah.
And so I think that made it really difficult. But I also think like the reason I stayed in it as long as I did and like did everything I did was because I was like, I have to do this. Like I have to be happy. Like I feel like even when I was documenting all this on TikTok, like I always had a very net neutral / positive tone. A, because I was like, I don't want my like employers to be mad at me. But B, because I was like, remember when I quit, I was like, what are people on TikTok going to say? Like, oh, you can handle it, or like, oh, you can do it. And like, that's like so crazy to me that that's like the first thing that comes to my mind. I was like, I don't want to like let everyone down because everyone's telling me this is a great thing and I'm doing a great thing and
people,
it's a big deal.
It's part of your personal brand. People look up to you. And I felt that too. Oh, that's the girl in investment banking. Yeah. That's the one. That's the inspiration for a lot of brown girls in their hometowns to look up to.
I used to get like messages from people being like, you're my inspiration. Like I'm in high school. Like I want to be just like you. I want to work in investment banking. And I was like, what about this is something you want to do? Like, why do you want this? And I don't even mean that. And like, I'm just like, what, like, why do you want to do this to yourself? Like, why did we make this corporate job the epitome of what success looks like for a brown kid? Like, why is this it? Like, no, like,
and it's so this fucking unrewarding. And I think that the one thing that people don't openly talk about as much is the health impact of doing a job like that. Is you have to ask yourself, like, what corporations shareholder value like matters as much as your health. And people don't know when they're wide-eyed high schoolers, which is we were those kids too. It's not to criticize, but when you are in that position, you can't even fathom. To you, like, money makes the world go round, and you get this badge of honor that your parents, your whole family, your whole generations of struggle are leading up to this moment. And you're like, oh, I'm on Wall Street. Oh my God, I did it. And then you're there and you're like, oh my God, I want to leave.
Yeah. I've always been the trophy kid though.
Yeah.
Like, and so like now, like sitting here unemployed, like I feel so just useless because I was always the trophy kid and I always had the internship. Like I never spent a summer living at home. Like I always had things lined up. I had my job a year before. Grinding, always was like everything. And then now it's nothing. And so it's like,
well, it's not nothing, but I understand what you mean. It feels like nothing in the moment when you're in that transitional phase.
Yeah.
And I also think culture and team dynamics plays such an interesting role in all of this. What you don't realize when you're looking at Wall Street from the outside in, you must think it's like all these like very sharp and tip-top bankers that are just the most intelligent people on the planet. And I'm not saying they're not smart, but what I am saying is I think as an industry, I think it breeds mediocrity a lot of times.
Oh, for sure.
It's about keeping old systems in place and pushing along.
Yes, it is. I think that's what I felt where I was like, I think your growth can get really stunted. And I think I was very good at just saying yes and doing what I was told. And I feel like even now when I've been interviewing for jobs and I like kind of get scared of jobs that have more autonomy. Sometimes I'm like, I don't know how to who am I reporting to?
You forgot how to,
And so I think it turned me into for a while, like, someone who was so proactive and so outgoing and like so like I want to run my own fucking company to am I allowed to ask this question? Am I allowed to do this thing? Like, do I have to send it back? Like, and I think it's tough because I feel like the people that interestingly did well in banking were the ones who kind of went past and pushed boundaries and just did shit.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it was because I think I kind of came in also being like, I'm a woman of color, like subconsciously.
You just don't feel comfortable.
You're just like, am I allowed to do these things? Whereas the white boy is like, oh yeah, I just did it and sent it back. And like, it's not even that big of a deal, but it's just like, you kind of just, I felt like I had to stay in my lane, which ultimately was also my downfall.
But it's hard because when you look at these white legacy boys, their whole life, their parents are basically like serving them everything on a silver platter. And they're like, honey, you deserve the world. Why? Because you're born into our family. And those people are the ones that have the courage to be the voice and the confidence. And sometimes they're wrong. So many times they are so confidently wrong, but it's the confidence with which they're wrong that makes it okay.
The people that do well on it are the people that built it, or like are the types of people that built it. And so like I don't think that if you're a brown kid, you can't do well in corporate. I think it's just like,
of
really
course.
Like listening to people and like knowing how to be strategic and knowing that like teams are important and networks are important and connections are important and not just thinking that it's your work quality. And also your work quality might also suck, and that's a possibility because my work quality kind of sucked at some points.
I think mine started going downhill when my physical health started declining.
It personally didn't have a problem with the hours. Like I if you found me a startup that I was super passionate about, like I would happily work from like 8 a.m. to 1 a.m. every day.
Yeah.
But it was like, what am I spending all these hours for? Right.
Yes.
And that was the issue where I was like, okay, so this meeting is a simple like pitch deck. It's due next week. Okay. Why do I have to do it like tonight at 11 p.m.? And then it was like, okay, well, what about this is like interesting? Like, okay, like maybe it's interesting, but now it's 1 a.m. and I have to go to sleep. So I need to get this done. And I really am not going to ask questions about it. So I think that was like another thing where I was like, I feel like I'm just doing stuff for the sake of doing it because someone's telling me to do it and I don't know why we're doing it. I could care less because I'm so exhausted, and it's like for a meeting that I'm not even going to be in. Like I learned a lot.
Oh, I learned so much, and I'm so grateful for the time that I had in investment banking. I don't want the message to be that, you know, people shouldn't go after that. I think they totally should. I think if you have the opportunity, go see if it's for you. Take up space, learn something new. But you need to be honest with yourself that when you want to leave investment banking, you just put in your 2 weeks notice and go. Yeah. You can't get trapped in the golden handcuffs. That's a downfall, I think.
If I could do it again, look, my internship was not representative. That was a big thing. I probably would have done something different now, like looking at the types of jobs I'm interested in now and how investment banking is not necessarily like a pre-qualifier for those. Like, I think that's the way to go about it. I also think just like, I didn't have the foresight to look into the things that I'm glad that you're watching our TikToks, and I'm glad that you're going on YouTube and you're watching videos. And like, I think that that's really important transparency that maybe, I don't know, I didn't look, but maybe it didn't exist at the time that we were recruiting. And I hope, and maybe had I seen stuff like this, it may have changed my perspective going in, or I would have been more educated going in about the dynamics, and maybe that would have changed my experience. So I think like the thing is like, if you want this life, great, but go at it educated and like with the proper resources and like knowing what you're getting into, which I did not know. And also know that there are things to reach above and beyond this, and that this is a great achievement, but it should only propel you to want to do more and want to be more.
Also, money cannot be end goal at all costs. I literally got a TikTok comment today, actually a few hours ago, where somebody said, I can't believe you would pick your health over money. And I literally looked at the comment and I was like, is this like, did they hear themselves? Did they hear themselves when they wrote this comment? I also think it's very easy to get trapped in the promise of so much money. And it's really important to know that money is not worth everything.
And we both come from very privileged backgrounds where like I am not in a situation where I have to support my parents. My parents are fully supporting me right now.
That's a different story. That's a good point.
So I think like, yes, I have gotten comments people that are like, look, I like need to make a bunch of money and I need to like support my family. And like that's totally fair. So I think like, but I like, again, like there are ways to go into this lifestyle, like knowing what you're getting into. But I also think like, I don't know, I think that you can find something that works for you. Like I, through this process, learned that I can work long hours if I'm passionate about what I'm doing. Or if I feel like I'm being valued. And I think that like, I hopefully will find ways to make as much or more money and work as hard and find ways to make that money. You know, like for me, I felt like I was working really, really, really hard and not getting a return on investment. And so that's why like it didn't really work. It's just, I think it taught me also to figure out where my return of investment will be and like what that opportunity will be. And this wasn't it.
Remember the day that you decided you were quitting, that you were like, I'm putting in my 2 weeks tomorrow?
I was really not having a good time. I like would like wake up. I was like waking up and crying.
Oh my God, so much crying. I cried so many times in those bathroom stalls.
Yeah, I think I just by the end of my 2 years felt so deeply uncomfortable being in the office because of the way that my seniors and some of my peers were disrespecting me. Probably the last 6 months I was there was like, I need to fucking leave. Like I need to go. I just couldn't find anywhere to go to.
I left before the end of the 2 years. My breaking point was, well, it was physical health, frankly. I remember the day I was so sleep deprived. My diet was so bad because you're eating takeout all the time. But which people are like, oh my God, that's so amazing. You get free food. It's like, dude, we get free food because we don't have time to not work and get our own food.
To cook our own meals.
And I just remember, it had been, the physical health stuff had been building up over a while. And I just remember my breaking point was like, there was a client meeting and I've never missed a client meeting. Every analyst has to be. There's no like, you can't just miss a client meeting. You can lose your job if you want to do that. But I went to the bathroom. I excused myself from the client meeting, which I was like, this is really out of character. I went to the bathroom and I was just sitting in the bathroom stall, hunched over, sobbing, holding my stomach and just crying and crying. So I was just in so much physical pain. I couldn't even stand up. And that was the day I decided. I was like, screw the 2-year thing. I was like, I can't make it that far. I cannot be sitting in my office's bathroom crying for the 100th time. And I'm not just crying because, oh, somebody raised their voice or, oh, it was too hard today, which is, you can also cry about that.
Yeah.
You can have, but this wasn't one of those cries. This was a cry for food. Yeah. This was a cry for water. This was a cry for rest, for sleep. Yeah. So, I mean, it's interesting because I also left without any backup plan. I didn't have time to think. I was like, I just need a clean cut because I've gotten to such a breaking point physically. Yeah. And there was no backup plan. And frankly, I'm still figuring it out. It's only been a few weeks since I'd left at the time that this is being filmed, which is January 2024. I left in December. But it's sad.
I think for me, it was like mental health because to go back and answer your point too, I think it was just, I remember waking up like feeling like I was going to throw up every morning and like so anxious that I was like, I just can't go today. And I think like my anxiety had just gotten so physical and so out of control, and that had never happened to me before. And I think like that for me was a huge sign where it got too normal being as anxious as I was. Yes. And then like taking a step back and realizing like this is not normal. Yeah. And like the way that I'm going about with my mental health. Because my physical health, like, I managed to make it to the gym every single day, but that was, like...
That's huge.
But that was, like... If I didn't, like, I would fall apart. Like, that was my break to, like... My trainer became my best friend. Like, talk to him. And, like, not think about work. And then, like, when the emails started coming earlier... And, like, I just was, like, at a point where I was, like, I can't do this anymore. Because, like, this is not normal. Like, I would call my therapist and I'm, like, I can't get out of bed today. Like, I just feel so sick.
And when you're in the right job for you, by the way, it's not supposed to feel like that.
I don't think so.
It's really not.
I hope not. I don't think I would ever, like, I feel like I've learned my points now where I'm like, if this isn't, like, if I'm in something and, like, it's just, like, headed in that direction again, like, I'm not doing that. So.
And I always equate my time to banking to being in a toxic relationship because symptomatically they're the same thing.
Same thing.
You're isolated from the people you love. You have to be somebody you're not and completely mute your personality to survive. You have to give everything, sacrifice every ounce of your being and bend over backwards to make it work. A lot of times there's empty promises of you know, oh, these things get better once you're an associate, once you're a VP.
Job optionality.
Yeah, there's so many exit opportunities, there's so many this, but a lot of those things are just empty words because at the end of the day, they need you to grind. And I just felt like this was the exact same feeling of being in an unhealthy relationship is I'm constantly doing everything I can to make it work. I'm crying every day. I'm anxious every day. I don't want to keep talking about it to my friends because I sound like a broken record. Yeah. It's like, how many times can my friends listen to me say, ugh, I hate my job? It's the same thing as saying, ugh, I hate my partner. They're so awful to me. Okay, then leave.
And then you can't leave.
And then you can't leave. So it is really a toxic relationship. It's symptomatic. The exact same symptoms. I felt like I was back in a place where I hadn't been in a very long time for completely different reasons. And it was sad. I was like, I don't want to be back here because of a job. Like I went to therapy to never feel like this again. But now I'm putting myself in this position to feel this way because of a job. A job. It's a line on your resume. And I don't know what my future holds. So I can't pretend to be some success story. I'm happier and healthier. And sure, things are uncertain, but I'm sure you can relate too in terms of the feeling. You don't wake up wanting to live. That's the biggest thing. There were times where I'd wake up in my job like, I don't want to do today. I would be like, I don't have any, I want to go back to sleep and be asleep for the next week. And it's so sad. Nobody talks about the mental health impact of investment banking because everybody's like, oh, you signed up for this. This was what you're living a life of privilege. You're making so much money on Wall Street. How dare you complain? Do you know how many people would kill to have your job? These are all comments I've gotten. And it's so frustrating because nobody understands until they're in that position.
I agree with you. I'm going to just leave this conversation there because I feel like that.
Mic drop.
Did it.
Anyways,
I don't really know what else to say at that point.
One of the good things about what I did in investment banking was I felt that I was so suffocated in terms of my human interaction and my ability to be myself that I actually started making TikTok content because of it as an outlet. And that's what led me to all of this. And I want to talk to you about your content creation journey and where that started as well.
It started with a compliance violation, actually. March 2022, like, I was like, okay, well, I'm not living at home. I have a job, whatever. So I, like, made my Instagram public, which is a huge mistake. And then I also started TikTok. And I was like, okay, like, I didn't know there was, like, a whole investment banking community. And I didn't intend to, like, make investment banking my in into TikTok. But I was like, oh, like, day in the life, haha. It'll be fun.
It's fun.
Made a day in the life. Nothing really, like, took off. And that I was like sitting in the office, and I was like me and like, you know, the entire 3 other people in my row. Everyone else was gone. It was like 11. And I was like, oh, like, I'm going to make a little like late night TikTok at the office of us like hanging out, ordering dinner, and massive freaking compliance violation because you're not supposed to film in the office at all. Upload it, and it just starts blowing up, and it has like 250,000 views in like 10 hours. And I'm getting all these messages from women being like, oh my God, like, thank you for being transparent about your experience, like how it's been, whatever. And I was like, this is amazing. Like, people have all these questions. People are like wondering what I'm doing. Also a lot of shit. Like, I was really concerned that like Liquidity was going to repost my video, or like some,
oh my gosh,
like,
yeah.
There was like a lot of like very negative comments, but I kind of figured something was wrong. Ended up looking at like the employee handbook, took it down, and then HR called me, and I was like really stressed out, and I like didn't eat for like a day, and HR was like, we need to talk to you. And I was like, hey, I'm really sorry, like took it down. I literally, like, my TikTok handle is at the Subway because it used to be OMG Sabeen actually. And I was in Grand Central Station where I was like, I should probably take my name out, and I saw Subway, so I put the Subway. Freaking out. But my staffer and my head of the group were incredibly kind. My group head literally was like at the Masters and took a call with me and my staff from the airport to talk about like what HR's like official ruling was, because at the time when HR called me, they're like, yeah, we don't, like, you might get fired, like, we don't know. And I was like,
okay.
I was like, I'm gonna lose my job, I have a cat, like, I'm gonna lose my apartment, like, I'm gonna be homeless. But yeah, so I don't know, like, started off with like the group being very kind, and I realized that it was, you know, something that people really wanted to do. I didn't grow up knowing about investment banking or having resources, and so I was like, well, let me just talk about my life. And I was like, I'm not going to talk about, you know, the office or like post about the office, but like, let me just talk about like resources and networking tips and very like educational content.
Yeah.
Days in my life. Kind of realized my class wasn't like too enthused about being in them, so kind of stopped, you know, talking about it, stopped posting with them in it. Just like kind of then got feedback from my staffer in my interview that I should not be trying to be an influencer. And feedback that was incorrect that I did not push back on was that I was more focused on being an influencer than I was into paying attention to detail in my work. And
because God forbid you be anything more than your job when you're an investment banking analyst.
And I think that was kind of frustrating, where I wish I'd been like, look, I'm not performing well. It's because I'm struggling at work for XYZ reason. It's not because I woke up today 30 minutes earlier to make one video that I post once a week.
Yeah.
And
ridiculous.
That quickly just kind of became the shit talking topic of my, you know, second analyst year.
Okay.
And I've talked a lot in depth, like on my TikTok, my podcast, just like it was not a great time. And that has still followed me around, because a couple weeks ago I was having dinner with someone in the class below me, and he had sent one of my TikToks to someone who was asking about like places to go out for Halloween. And the guy was like, oh, is this that girl who used to work here that never did her work and only made TikToks? And my friend was like, no, she worked. Like, I was in the office with her very late. Like, there was a reputation that was preceding me, also added on to my mental health and stress, because my one creative outlet made me feel like a piece of shit.
Ostracized completely, yeah.
I would be like, okay, I'm just going to stop doing TikTok. And then I would like walk outside and someone would be like, oh, like, you're that girl from TikTok. I was like, okay, like, clearly I feel like every time I tell myself I'm going to stop doing this, like I get some sign or another, or someone being like, oh, I love your videos, you keep doing it. So like, I was just gonna keep doing it. I just had a really tough time while I was at it, but also was rewarding in my creative outlet. So,
yep, that makes sense. I was very lucky. People at work definitely knew about my social media, but it's a bit more nuanced, the culture at my firm. But I think people, at least they didn't say anything to my face about it, and I will say that helps. I can only imagine if having that one creative outlet that you do have being shoved in your face over and over again. I mean, that's just to this day, actually. Like, was at a Michigan football game a couple of months ago, ran into someone from the analyst class below me who, like, decided to make a comment about it to my face. And I was like, I haven't worked with you in months. Like, do you guys not have anything else to talk about? Like, it just was, like, it was just so, like, I don't know. Like, even if it wasn't something that was talked about all the time, like, that was my entire life. Like, the fact that I was so afraid to go in the office, I was like, I don't want to have people talking about me. Like, to be honest, I don't know how much of it was true at this point, but like it was enough that it made me uncomfortable, and no one did anything about it, and I also didn't feel comfortable doing anything about it, and I didn't know how to handle it. And it's not your fault. You're not supposed to know how to handle that.
Now I know better, and now I hope I've explained to people better, and now I know that I did have allies in the workplace that like would have stood up for me had I said something, and I like whatever, like
sure in hindsight, but
it's been a great experience. Like it's graduated from investment banking content to unemployment and figuring out your next steps and just like navigating your 20s. Yeah. And it's been great. Like I had someone message me today and he was like, I like live at home with my parents. I'm like really struggling with the job search and you make me feel like I'm not alone. And that's all I think I've just really like, for me, it was started off as always just being able to be a woman of color, like sharing my experiences, and it's graduated from investment banking to just continue to do that about like my life in my 20s. And it's been a great way to connect with people. And I don't know, I feel like I'm glad I do it, and it's fun for me. It's not like,
and it opens so many doors. I mean, the reason that you and I are sitting here today is because we are both content creators on social media. Like I would not have known that there was another Pakistani Muslim girl working an investment banking job in the same city as me, within the same like mile of me, going through the same thing. And I feel like it sparked a beautiful friendship, and it's honestly, the digital age is an amazing one because it gives us these opportunities to pursue these paths, and not just that, but see of a life in a world beyond what we've been taught and what we see on a daily basis. So it's leads to a very kind of expansive, I think, worldview. Just quick last question: do you have any plans for the future? I know you also have a podcast, which we haven't been able to talk much about, but what are your dreams for your content, your podcast?
Just like, what's your plan? What's your plan, Becca?
And you don't even have to have a plan. It's just, what's your hope? What's your vision?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a plan. I don't know what I guess in terms of goals, I would love to find a job, but trying my luck in the startup and VC space and looking into roles that are a better fit for me that combine like the analytical, technical things I liked, but also have abilities to meet people and just be more like hands-on and multifaceted. So I don't know exactly what that looks like. I don't think it's in corporate America, but I think it'll be in hopefully a startup or a VC.
It'll be adjacent,
something like that. I think in terms of content, I just think my TikTok and my Instagram, I just want to keep growing them, and I think they're just like an extension of my life right now. So I don't know, whatever I'm up to, I kind of just put it on there and hope people connect and relate.
It's therapeutic too.
Yeah.
It's fun.
It's the only like interaction I have. I just like talk to myself in my living room and put it on the internet, and people are like, "Oh, that's great. Like, what do you think about this?" So I don't know. I think that's been good. I like have been very candid about like living at home and being unemployed, and it's definitely been a struggle. And so I hope that I get to move back and be around my friends soon.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I think for the podcast, so I host a podcast called 20 something, and hopefully by the time this episode premieres, we will be back online. I took a bit of a break because I kind of wanted to reevaluate, what episodes looked like and what I really wanted to share with the world. And I think 20 something is just like, again, kind of my whole point of doing content is just making people feel like they can relate and they're not alone, and that like we have these shared experiences. So I think 20 something is just an extension of that, and talking about experiences that affect all 20 somethings and talking about those experiences like with my friends and with guests, and not in the format of, like a 2-minute TikTok, but more of like a 25-minute, vlog or video or whatever it is.
You get deeper that way too in long form.
Get deeper, and I don't know, just kind of talk about the things that I probably want to talk about and need help with and need help understanding. So I'd love for 20 something to also continue to take off and do well.
Yeah.
And I just want to like move back to New York City and get more involved in these different communities. I feel like I was so preoccupied with banking that there's like a big creator community and a South Asian community and just like all these things that I haven't explored, and like music and all this. So I just would love to do that.
I'd love to have you back in New York City too, just so I can see you more often.
I actually am actively trying to move to LA, but whichever way the wind blows.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I could take you, on either coast. In the midst of all the noise in this world, what is your one key message to people listening and watching right now?
My message in the midst of everything is just like continue to like always try to be exceptional and always like try to be the best that you can be, and push yourself and be very unapologetic about who you are and the type of person you are. I feel like I am the person I am because I don't care what the aunties say, and I don't care what the communities say, and I don't care what I love my parents, but I'm going to do what I'm going to do, what feels right by me, and I've done right by what feels good to put on the internet and do with my content and do with my career. And so I think just continuing to strive to be great and trying to do what just feels best and most authentic and genuine to me and to ourselves is what we should be doing. And
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. And above all, thank you so much for coming on today. It's been a pleasure having you. And this was a great chat.
I'm so glad to be here. Had a great time.
Thank you all so much for tuning in, and that's all for today. Tune back in next Sunday for another episode, and I'm your host, Sandalina Sitar, signing off.